they immediately stop. And they're like, okay, we're done. You're fine. Goodbye. But nobody ever asked, why does she have this? So again, why is a healthy looking 26-year-old having a total hip replacement? I never knew at the time that that wasn't normal. No one ever stopped to ask, well, maybe there really is something wrong that none of us are catching. Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be about the missed signs or overlooked signals of EDS, POTS, and possibly MALS from the time I was little until my diagnosis. First of all, I want to apologize that the quality of my videos is not what it used to be. I honestly don't have the energy to get out my big camera and set up my microphone and create a nice background. So this is the best I can do, and it's all I'm able to do right now. Hopefully it's still helpful and informative. So since my symptoms started getting much worse over the last year, I have spent more time thinking back over my young adulthood, my teen years, and even all the way back to my childhood years, and recognizing that many of the signs and signals were there all that time, but they were missed, or they were passed off as you're faking, or you're just weak, or you're just lazy, or you're just trying to get attention. So I'm going to go through some of what I think back then were indications of what I have now, and hopefully help you guys who might be having some of the same issues, or maybe your children are showing these signs, so that they don't have to go and you don't have to go 36 years without a diagnosis. So the very first thing I can remember was when I was in kindergarten. I was probably 4 or 5, and at recess we would all go outside, and the kids were expected to get up and run around the parking lot and climb on the jungle gym and the playground equipment. And I remember distinctly sitting on the sidewalk, and there was one other girl, I even remember her name, who would sit next to me, and we would sit while everyone else was playing. And I was always told, get up, get out there, run around, you're just being lazy. Typical kids, they like to run around, they like to get exercise, they like to chase their friends and play games and play Ring Around the Rosie and do all those things. I didn't, and the reason that I didn't back then was that when I would get up and run, I would have horrible, deep, gnawing pain under my rib cage, like way up underneath my rib cage. And I would always just, it hurts so bad. And they would say, get up, run, get out there. You're just being lazy. And it's just a stitch in your side. It'll go away. And of course, it never went away. The more I ran, the more I exercised, the worse it got. When I was about 17, they were trying to find the cause of my extreme fatigue, which they ended up just diagnosing me with depression. But while they were trying to find out what was going on, they discovered a murmur, a heart murmur. Now, I'm putting that in quotes because it ended up not being a murmur. I'll go into that later. But I was told all my life that I had this heart murmur. And they thought, this is it. This is why she's tired. She's got something wrong with her heart. So I had a echocardiogram or some other test. It was many years ago, but they thought maybe I had endocarditis, and that's why I was so tired, and that checked out fine. So this is the thing that I've had my whole life, is when a test comes back normal, they immediately stop, and they're like, okay, we're done, you're fine, goodbye, just because the test came back normal. Not one single doctor had gone, okay, this test is normal, so let's try to figure out what's actually going on. No, they'd rather just put me on antidepressants. So fast forward to today, we found out that the murmur is not actually a murmur at all, because I've had echoes, I've had other cardiac tests to try to determine where the murmur is coming from, and they could never identify a problem. I have a little bit of tricuspid valve regurgitation, but it's not significant enough to cause the murmur. And this is the key here. The murmur disappears when I inhale and hold my breath. Disappears, completely gone. Lub dub is what you hear when I breathe in and hold my breath. When I breathe out all the way, you immediately hear the boom, whoosh, boom, whoosh, boom, whoosh. Very loud, very distinct. Turns out it's not a murmur at all. It's a bruit, which is the sound of turbulent blood flow in a compressed vessel. And it's coming from most likely either my celiac artery, my superior mesenteric artery, or my renal vein, which we know is almost completely compressed. And because those vessels are so high up in my chest, they're very close to my heart. They're like within an inch of my heart. So it could easily be mistaken for a murmur because it's right in that general area. But the fact that it disappears when I hold my breath, I just had a GI doctor listen to it again last week, and he said, I'm going to have to agree with you that that is definitely not a murmur, that is a bruit. I would also get extremely fatigued, and they would say, oh, you're just out of shape, you just need to exercise more. And I would get up and make one lap around the parking lot, and I was just so exhausted, and all the other kids were fine, but I was exhausted. And when I would go out and play with my brothers and build forts in the woods, I would come in from playing outside and I would have to lay down on the couch because I was in so much pain. I could not move, and I was crying, and my back was all seized up and my neck was seized up, and I would have to lay on heat. And I was always told by my parents, you're just overdoing it. Don't overdo it. How many kids, when they go out and play outside, come in and are crying in pain? That this was not a red flag, that they did not pursue what is wrong with my child, is still shocking to me to this day. But of course, as a child, I just internalized all those things. And so growing up, I was always under the belief that I was weak, that I was lazy, that I was just inferior, that I was somehow defective or broken because I could never do the things that other kids would do. I was also very uncoordinated. I would trip and fall a lot. I would fall flat on my face and get big eggs on my forehead at older ages when kids aren't generally falling like that. Now, if you're a toddler and you're 2 years old or you're just learning how to walk, that's normal. But when you're 5 or 6 and you're still falling like that, that's not normal. I would also roll my ankles all the time. I could walk on a flat surface and I would roll my ankles. And I remember spraining my ankles when I was very, very young. Also, I remember I was probably 8 or 10. I can't remember the exact age, but I was young. I remember laying in bed at night crying because I had such a horrible pain up under my rib cage. And my parents took me to, I don't know if we went to an urgent care or if we just went to a local family doctor, but they were suspecting, oh, maybe it's appendicitis. Well, one, that wasn't in the spot where the pain was, but they thought, well, what other pain is this young girl having? What could it possibly be? And the only thing they came up with was appendicitis. Well, when that checked out normal, they just sent me home. And my parents, I remember in the car ride home and subsequently, it was all, you're making this up and you cost us money and we had to go to the doctor and there was nothing wrong with you and you're just trying to get attention. And so from then on, I would just suffer in silence. I wouldn't tell people when I was hurting, but that pain was always there. I remember being told that I had an eating disorder and that I was anorexic because I was always so thin and I wouldn't eat much at meals. And I told my mom, I said, every time I eat, I get this horrible, horrible pain right here. And I would point to the spot right under my xiphoid process, right in the part where your ribs go up, right there. And it was like someone had punched me in the gut when I would eat. And I could only eat a very small amount and I would get full very quickly, which of course is a classic MALS symptom. And with MALS, it's an anatomical deformity. So it's something that you're born with and you have your whole life. And we've seen now in the CT scans that my celiac artery comes off my aorta way high up in my chest instead of down low like most people. So my diaphragm is compressing that artery and compressing the nerves around the artery that is causing me pain and shortness of breath, as you can tell right now, and inability to eat, and of course, which is why I've got the PICC line and I'm on TPN now. So all of that was manifesting back then, but it was never recognized, it was never acknowledged, and I was told to just shut up and deal with it. So some of these signs and symptoms are from the EDS, the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Some of them are from MALS. So the ones that are more related to EDS would be things like the muscle and joint pain and then POTS, of course, dysautonomia. A lot of those symptoms were evident way back then, and I was put on antidepressants because I was told, and anti-anxiety medication because I was told I had anxiety, and I was having panic attacks, and it really wasn't panic attacks, it was my elevated heart rate from the dysautonomia. My heart rate would be 150 or 160, and I would be out of breath, and I would feel panicky because I didn't know what was going on in my body. And dysautonomia is your autonomic nervous system going haywire. And so when I would have those attacks, I was just told, you have depression or you have anxiety. And the depression part was because of the extreme crippling fatigue that comes along with that. And I would sleep 12 hours at night and I would wake up and I would still be exhausted. And as a teenager, I could barely make it up the stairs of our house to my bedroom. And I would nap for 2 hours every day and I would still be tired. So many of the signs and symptoms of dysautonomia were there. The Ehlers-Danlos syndrome symptoms were there. I loved horses and I wanted to ride and, be a horsewoman and go to shows and do all of that. But every time I would go out to ride, it was so painful, not only to just lift the saddle up, but to bend over and do, the hoof picking and the grooming, tightening straps, all of that hurt my back, my shoulders, my arms, my wrists, my fingers. It was, everything I did was painful, but because I had been told, you're fine, I always just thought, well, this is normal and horseback riding is painful and hard. I also couldn't ride, I couldn't sit the trot. In Western horsemanship, you sit the trot, or they call it the jog, and you sit your butt on the saddle like this. And in English riding, you do what's called post the trot. So you raise up out of the saddle with each stride of the horse. And I could only do that because doing that would keep me from feeling any of the jarring of the horse's gait. If I tried to sit the trot, I would have this jarring, and guess what that would do? That would trigger the MALS pain. So I would immediately get that stitch in my side, which was the compression of those nerves and the blood vessels right under my xiphoid process, and it would be so painful that I couldn't sit the trot. I would have to post to lift myself up off the saddle, and I was able to do that to keep myself from having that pain. Other things like jumping on trampolines or little rebounders, those are supposed to be really good for your health, and I could never do that because it would always give me that stitch in my side pain. And I always thought, man, how do people do this? How do people enjoy this activity when it gives you a stitch in your side? And I didn't know that it wasn't like that for everyone. Riding in the car, anytime we would go over a train track or a speed bump, it was that sharp pain in my upper abdomen. At age 17, I also had corrective surgery for pectus excavatum, which is a congenital orthopedic abnormality. Your skeleton, your chest, and here's your sternum and your ribs coming together. It's caved in, and it can be caved in the middle, or it can just be caved in on one side. But anyway, it's malformed and it's pressing in on your internal organs, and that is a genetic defect that is often linked with connective tissue disorders like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, Marfan syndrome. And so when I had that, it was just, let's get this fixed. And we got it fixed, but nobody ever asked, why does she have this? Who in the family passed this genetic defect on to her? Who has EDS or who has Marfan's? And it's very rare that EDS does occur spontaneously, but usually it's autosomal recessive. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but it is there's a 50% chance of a child having it if one of the parents has it. So because I don't have any contact with my family, I don't know who passed it on to me, but I know that somebody did. So when we had that corrected, nobody ever asked, why does she have this? So that was done when I was 17. Then when I was 26, I had a total hip replacement. My entire joint was completely torn up. All my cartilage was gone. My labrum was torn up and part of it was missing. I had chondromalacia on the entire head of the femur, and there was nothing they could do. They tried another procedure first to try to salvage the joint, couldn't do it, had to replace it. So again, why is a healthy looking 26-year-old having a total hip replacement, something that 80 and 90-year-olds have? Another thing I remember is when I was a teenager, I wanted to play violin. And so I bought a violin, I took lessons, and I practiced, and I eventually ended up giving up violin and selling my violin because it was too painful for me to lift my arms to play the violin. And my fingers hyperextended so much that in order to press down on the fingerboard, I couldn't hold that. They would just hyperextend, and I would end up pressing 2 strings at once, and which sometimes is a good thing, but anyway, it was very difficult. And to hold the bow, my thumb kept hyperextending, and it was just very difficult to hold the bow correctly, to press the strings correctly, and then to hold my arms up enough to hold that violin. After 10 minutes, all of my shoulders, all the way up into my neck, was just throbbing in pain, burning in pain. And I just ended up giving it up. And I never knew at the time that that wasn't normal. I thought, well, boy, people just must have a lot of stamina to be able to play violin because it sure is painful. You know, no one ever asked why. On the contrary, I was always told, well, you're just lazy, or you have low pain tolerance, or you're weak, or, so many things my whole life. Like, no one ever stopped to ask, well, maybe there really is something wrong that none of us are catching. Maybe the doctors don't know. Maybe the doctors aren't right. Maybe the tests coming back normal means they need to run different tests. Maybe someone actually has to put their hands on the patient and feel around and listen to the actual person instead of just looking at the tests. I wish someone would have fought for me. So if you're watching this video and you have recognized some of these symptoms in yourself or maybe in your child, and you're wondering, and that little voice inside of you is saying something's not right, don't give up. Keep searching. It might not be MALS, it might not be EDS, it might not be POTS, it might not be what I have, but it might be something. It might be something that no one has thought of. It might be something rare, it might be something common, but it's something that got overlooked. And whatever you do, if your child or if you are complaining of symptoms, are having symptoms over and over and over for years and years, and someone is telling you that it's all in your head, or you're telling your child that it's all in their head, or you just don't want to believe it, it's not in your head. I had a doctor look at me last week, and he made me cry in his office because he said, I just want to apologize to you for the medical system failing you and for being told all these years that it's all in your head. I am looking you in the eye right now and telling you it's not in your head, and you have a right to feel the way you do. And I only wish my parents would have said the same thing. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful. The reason I make these videos is so that my struggles that I'm going through are not wasted, that you guys can somehow benefit from them. And so I hope this was a benefit. Please like this video, please subscribe to my channel, please share it with anyone you know who you think it will help, and have an awesome, wonderful, blessed day. Bye-bye.